Coming up, a look at one of the game's greatest stars. It's the legend of Broadway Joe on NFL Films Presents.
The statistics tell us that Joe Namath's career was merely ordinary. He passed for a lot of yards, but his completion rate was right at 50%, and he threw more interceptions than touchdowns. But to watch him play in his prime is to know how exceptional a talent he was, and to live during the 60s is to know the impact he had on the game of football and on the nation. He was either loved or hated, a hero and anti-hero rolled into one. There have been songs about him, stories, even a new book about Joe. But we'll begin our look at the legend of Broadway Joe with the unique feature we produced 30 years ago called Joe and the Magic Bean.
Once upon a time, there was a magic bean that had a magic spell, and fame and glory would belong to whomever could throw it straight and handle it well. All across the land, wise men plotted and planned to see if they would be the man who could hold this bean in hand. But alas, it was such a difficult task that no solution could be found. So they dashed it and smashed it in anger on the ground. Now, far, far away in a kingdom on the coast, there was a little prince who made a mighty boast. "I'll throw that bean," he said, "and straight I'll make it go." "There's no doubt about it," said the boy named Broadway Joe. Now, to make this story short, I'll have to report that Broadway Joe was right, for in his arm was a magic charm that controlled the bean and its flight. Broadway Joe traveled far and wide and threw the bean so well that everyone gathered round him to tell him he was swell, and scores of lovely maidens attended to his wants, and a guard of honor followed him to all his usual haunts. Then from out of the ground there came a sound that shook the entire shore. It came from the tread of some men who said, "This Joe is simply a bore." From their fearsome faces smoke did spew, while their heads were as hard as an old horseshoe. They were rough and tough and worked all day in the sun. They were cranky and cruel and spoiled other people's fun. But Joe's days were filled with smiles and zest, and he turned to these villains and said with a jest, "If I happen to meet you guys someday, it'll be best for you to get out of my way." "What's that?" growled those men who were terribly gruff. "How can you say such ridiculous stuff? We'll meet you in battle and steal your bean, then use it ourselves to be nasty and mean." And so it came to pass, in a big round castle way down in the south, that these merciless men came to take the bean and shut Joey's mouth. The castle was filled with faces familiar and faces stranger, but all of them knew that Joe was in danger. So they gathered together, put their hands on their breast, and sincerely wished him their very best. But Broadway Joe needed luck of more than one kind, because suddenly trouble came from in front and then from behind. They gave him such a knock on the crown that he forgot his bean and left it on the ground. The meanies in blue grabbed the thing and turned it over to their old wizard king. Now everyone rose and stood in alarm to see if the ancient wizard still had magic in his arm. Now, in his prime, many ages ago, he could have thrown that bean and hit a dime. But by now, his magic arm had spent its force, and when he threw the bean, it just fluttered off course. The wizard's men looked solemn and tragic, and sadly they spoke, "This bean's not magic. It's a fraud, a joke. Give it back to the kid. If it obeys his command, we'll admit defeat and crown him king of the land. But the bean was magic, and everyone knew it, and watched in amazement whenever Joe threw it. He hopped and popped and swung with a swish, and the bean obeyed his every wish. As darkness fell on this incredible day, the meanies in blue just faded away, and everyone cheered for Broadway Joe, for he had put on such a spectacular show. His beam was turned to silver, as bright as the eye could see, and Joe returned a hero to his kingdom by the sea. The end.
Greatness isn't patient, and it won't be compromised. Joe Namath was great, and he knew it.
Coach Paul Bear Bryant said, Joe, you know these pros are going to be coming to you about signing a contract. Do you have any idea what you're going to ask for? I said, no, sir, but these guys in the last year or so had signed for $100,000 or so. I think I'll ask for something like that. And Coach Bryant said, well, you go ahead and ask for $200,000. Better place to start. 2 representatives from the Cardinals came to my dormitory and asked me what I wanted to sign. And I told them $200,000, and they both leaned back. Oh, my goodness, fell down on the bed. The guy was standing here and leaned back against the wall, screaming like they were in agony. And after they calmed down a little bit, I said, there's one more thing. It's what? I said, a new car. They said, a new car, too. I said, yeah. They said, what kind of car? I said, a Lincoln Continental. And they said, oh, that figures. They went nuts.
Namath once proclaimed, I can't wait till tomorrow because I get better looking every day. And he meant it, from his head down to his toes.
My feet felt lighter in white. That's what I want. I wanted white shoes. I couldn't understand how people made a big deal out of it, but the more we went around and the more I saw everybody had black shoes on, for me to change at that point would be punking out, man. I don't punk out, so what? So you wear black, I'll wear white.
Whatever his fashion statement, nothing spoke louder than Joe Namath's right on.
As a coach, I used to go out on Saturday to watch college players, and Sid Gilman said to me, what'd you see? And I said, I saw a guy who tips the field. He says, what do you mean? I said, this son plays like he's always going downhill. I mean, he's so good. He plays like he's going downhill. He said, who is it? I said, a kid Namath out of Pennsylvania.
If he couldn't have played football the way he did, then all that other stuff, you would have laughed at it. But because he could play the way he did, you didn't laugh at anything. He had the best-looking drop and the best-looking release and the best-looking pass that I've ever seen.
Well, Joe Namath was the most exciting quarterback to play the game and to watch play it. He had a style that no one else had. His feet were so quick and so smooth. It was almost like a ballet in motion. To watch him play to this day, at the old tapes, it was just beautiful.
I've never seen a quarterback that had a head that went like so. No, 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 yes, boom. To be able to pick out the open receiver, he was just phenomenal.
I remember one play in New York where we were playing the Jets, and it was a 5-man pattern. I will never forget it. And I really saw his skill show itself in such totality to me. Joe is set up right side, and Don Mann has run a 15-yard out on Marcellus. He's covered. So Pete Lammers is the tight end. Pete comes out and runs a circle pattern. Snell goes into the flat. Boozer runs a check down on my right. Well, then he moves past where Lammers is. And I have this slight panic, like, oh gracious, I'm out of position because he might go to Boozer. He wasn't going to Boozer. He was coming back to the other side of the field where Sowell was running an out and up. Emmett Thomas had Sowell covered, and the ball comes over the outside shoulder. Sowell makes the catch. And it was one of those kinds of joys, even though they scored against us, of seeing the skill that a Joe Namath happened to have.
He was the first to throw for 4,000 yards in a season, and he once threw for 496 on a mere 15 completions. When he had a choice between going short or long, Joe Willie always took it deep. In the NFL, there was an old cliche about moving the ball 3 yards at a time. In the AFL, Namath's credo was 40 yards and a cloud of dust.
The NFL had great players, but everybody had to wear their hair the same style and behave the same. They didn't have the liberty to be themselves, I don't think. And it was in the fishbowl in New York. It was wonderful.
Blank on the board, Joe! Blank on the board, Joe! All right, 75 double choice. Flanker Argo out in table on 2.
His unmatched talent would make him a world champion and a Hall of Famer. But Joe Namath had more than firepower. Joe Namath had star power, and he knew it.
You talk about style. The most stylish quarterback that ever played was Joe Namath. On and off the field.
Namath was a true New Yorker from Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, who enjoyed the city so much and what it had to offer and had a ball.
Sometimes they talk about drinking and conniving around with ladies and stuff. It seems almost un-American to me for a bachelor not to, go around having a drink with a lady now and then. And why all of a sudden that's become an evil in me, I don't know, but some people don't like it. Well, you can't please everybody. I'm just trying to get along, just trying to get by. Look at that shot.
There's really not major misconceptions about old Joe and his lifestyle back then because most of it was pretty true as far as going about the town or whatever.
I have no official statistics on this, but I wouldn't be surprised if his career was the cause of a lot of female fans being attracted to the NFL. He had a kind of style. He was a jock, but it could be a real gentleman.
There he was in New York, being this grand character that he was. And he was aware he had that magic. And that magic made him wealthy, that magic made him famous.
And all of a sudden, things were different. Somebody's tapped me on the shoulder, do this, do that. Hey, Joe, how you doing? Bup, bup, bup. It took me a while to learn to appreciate being in that position. It was tough at times, but I learned that tough life was a lot better than the life I knew where nobody knew old Joe, where nobody would smile and tap me on the shoulder or I couldn't get a seat in a restaurant.
Namath always got a seat at his own nightclub, Bachelor's 3, a hangout for athletes and gamblers. His association with this saloon alarmed the NFL establishment, but it also enhanced the kind of celebrity that could only be nurtured in New York City.
Joe Namath somewhere else would not have had the kind of aura that has become known of Joe Namath. Going to New York, being able to help a fledgling league at that time, signing with the New York Jets, and no doubt the history of Sonny Werblin with his background in media and television, that type of thing.
He was drafted and paid all that money for his personality. Sonny was a showbiz guy, and he found his showbiz quarterback.
I know he sat down and talked to Joe. He said, we've got to get as much publicity for this team as we can, because we've got to get the American Football League on the front page of the sports sheet each and every day, one way or another.
Mr. Werblin, being in show business, believed in the star system, in making movies and entertainment and filling the stands, putting people on the field that the fans could relate to or they wanted to come see special, the star system.
He had this charisma, plus he had the sex appeal, and the girls were screaming for him. 5,000 fans after a ball game would be out there just to see Joe Namath, to wave to him, to touch him. It was sort of like the Beatles type atmosphere.
By 1967-68, The most famous player in football is Joe Namath. He was the one name that people who weren't even football fans knew.
Namath was the first great commercial property out of football.
What they did with Namath was a typical procedure, which was done even with Babe Ruth, that is, mixing it with entertainment. For the day, it was big, including some horrible movies where he played a motorcycle guy or something. He does a lot of musicals now.
Very truly yours, and get it out immediately, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Namath was featured in commercials that usually played off of, or poked fun at, his headline-making image as a macho swinger.
Our girls.
I'm very pleased with your work, Joseph. By the way, what are you doing for dinner tonight?
Joe Namath in Beauty Mist pantyhose? Yes, we did it to prove that Beauty Mist can make any legs look like $1 million.
Now, I don't wear pantyhose, but if Beauty Mist can make my legs look good, imagine what they'll do for yours.
I think great athletes, particularly in that era, the biggest risk they could ever take is to try and change, because there is a certain amount of what they do that's almost magic. And Namath found that the magic was in being himself and putting himself out there and pushing the edge of that envelope. And that ultimately made him a commercial vehicle, above and beyond his football skills, although that's what it was based on.
Well, I always enjoyed Joe Namath. I always enjoyed his great skill. I enjoyed his competitiveness and just his overall abilities as a player. And I think here was a fellow who played in the American Football League, who had the kind of media attention, star quality, and income that would help raise the level of income opportunities for the rest of us.
Namath also helped elevate the reputation of the AFL when he led the Jets to a showdown with Baltimore in Super Bowl III. The Jets were 19-point underdogs. So it seemed that too much Miami sunshine was responsible for the bold guarantee that Namath made at an awards banquet.
I got up to the podium, and about the time I'm getting ready to talk, a guy in the back of the room, "Hey, Namath, we're gonna kick your..." You know what? I said, whoa, wait a minute. I said, I got news for you. We're gonna win the game, I guarantee you. Our team wasn't getting respect, and that's how the guarantee came out. It was not planned, it wasn't premeditated, it was just anger and frustration, and I really believed we were going to win the game.
Namath was brash enough and confident enough to make the prediction and then follow through with a great performance. And so you got to take your hat off and give him credit. Namath was able to read our blitz, and when we did blitz, he got rid of the ball and hurt our blitzing.
Namath continually outgunned and outguessed the vaunted Colts defense.
As I had it on last time. I tried to take the ball away. I had a 60-yard rip on.
But they didn't safety.
They checked it off.
Did you check it though?
Yeah, I checked the line. I had something else on. You know what I mean?
While Namath didn't put up gaudy statistics, a gutsy performance earned him game MVP honors as he secured the AFL's first ever Super Bowl victory. Although off-field exploits established him as the flamboyant character Broadway Joe, Super Bowl III demonstrated that Namath was a natural when it came to playing the role of a champion. And it was this performance that provided him with the thrill of a lifetime.
When the game ended, there was such a feeling of elation, joy, a tickling explosion inside. The teammates, we did it! We did it, It was wonderful. And going off that field, it was kind of like a finality of it, yes. And everybody's cheering, finally, we did it, we did it, we did it. We were number one. I never put my hand up like that for some reason. I don't know why, but that's the only time. And it was just a feeling. I didn't think about it. It was just, yes, yes, yes. Oh, it was great.
The NFL stood for the old values, and the AFL, with Namath especially, stood for personality and individualism. Joe Namath was seen almost as the Antichrist, with his white shoes and his hair flowing behind his helmet.
There was a lot of BS going on around with Vietnam, with hair length, with faces, with clothes and all that. to me, people were making a deal out of it, were wrong. They weren't allowing us to be ourselves, to express ourselves, and still fit in society in a contributing way. We got a letter once from the president of the league demanding that we shaved. Coach Eubank hid that letter and didn't show his team until after we clinched the championship. Associating with unsavory people or undesirable people was against the NFL rules. Now, it wasn't very specific, but he had some pictures of some people that had frequented our restaurant, and he said, Joe, these people are coming in your restaurant, can't have you there. I felt like I was getting persecuted for something here that wasn't right, man, and I refused to go along with it.
I've thought about it more than I thought about anything so far that I've ever done. But it's the only right thing to do. The only right thing to do. And so I am retiring. I'm finished.
I was lost. I'm sitting in Central Park and I'm watching all these people play with their dogs, walk down Fifth Avenue and all, and I'm saying, you know, none of these people care whether I play football or not. I'm the only one that cares. And I love it. Let me go back and play. Football's the farthest thing from their mind, but I was consumed by it. I needed to play. I loved it. I went back.
Namath had consciously chosen the game over the glitter. And from that point forward, fans would begin to understand the iron will behind the steel blue eyes.
I think it was more than this Broadway Joe image. I think it was the fact that he suffered. That made him very vulnerable and very human, because he did suffer. I mean, his legs were terrible. So you're always aware that it could be over in a heartbeat. And then he was cocky in spite of it. It was kind of an RAF thing, you know, wrap the white scarf around because tomorrow we die.
Namath built his larger-than-life mystique on knees that could barely support an ordinary man.
I always knew that you had to play with some pain because the game is going to get you. You're going to get hurt. You were either tough enough to play with some pain or you weren't tough enough to play.
Namath's knees were already so badly damaged when he came out of college that he needed surgery to be able to play pro football at all.
After my first operation, the Jet orthopedist came into my room and said, Joe, the operation went well. It's great. We think you can play 4 years. I can remember thanking God that I could play pro football for 4 years, maybe.
Namath would endure 13 seasons in the pros.
Namath never missed a regular season game from 1965 through the 1969 season. If you remember, Ben Davidson broke Joe's cheekbone. And when they asked Joe after the game, how did it happen that Davidson hit you and everything, he said, no, he says, I had a tough steak at the pregame meal. Joe just didn't want to give any credit to anyone that they could put any touch of fear in him.
Eventually, as he knew it would, the game did get him. Namath suffered a broken wrist, a broken cheekbone, a separated shoulder, and had 4 major operations to reconstruct both knees. When he was just 27 years old, Namath's injuries forced him to sit out most of the 1970 and 71 seasons.
I remember a game they played against Denver, and Dave Costa put him down, defensive tackle, put him down with a shot, and I think Namath missed a series. And afterwards, Costa in his uniform was in the Jets locker room. He was worried that he'd hurt him. And I talked to him, and I said, why? I mean, it's another player. He said, look at what he's done for all of us. He said, he's the reason why we're making a decent salary. I don't want to hurt him.
He returned on a blustery November day, summoned into a game the Jets trailed hopelessly. But if football had robbed Namath of his agility, it could not steal his swagger. And it was Namath who took back the hearts of the football world. In the game's final minutes, Namath led a rally that brought the Jets to the brink of victory, and the game's final play would become, in a magical way, a defining moment of his career. His pass was intercepted and the comeback fell short, but somehow the game did not feel lost. Somehow, Namath had won. With him, the game had transcended the numbers on the scoreboard. The hero had returned, and that was all that mattered.
The idea of Namath after so many surgeries and, which costs him his mobility, which makes everything that he does that much more amazing. Because not only can he still make these incredible plays, he's able to make them even with that horrid pain. And it's like that red badge of courage. A guy who will play with that kind of pain is a guy everybody respects.
If, as is often said, football is a game of war, then Joe Namath may have been the only player to ever walk onto the field of battle with no enemies. More than Broadway Joe, who stood for sports or show business, he was Joe Willie Namath, who on painful knees stood tall for the spirit of football.
There's nothing easy about football, and life isn't always easy. It's learning to have to deal with sadness, with pain, learning how to get along with people. Football convinced me that life is a team game.
This is the story of George Sauer. Drafted in 1965 by his father, George Sauer Sr., the Jets' chief scout at the time, George Jr. rocketed to AFL stardom. A three-time All-Pro, he was dubbed the receiver's receiver.
We had quick ways of breaking a pattern and giving a signal here and there, and George was brilliant at that.
He was as good as anybody ever played. I mean, how much more do you need to do?
In the spotlight of Super Bowl III, Sauer shined, setting a Super Bowl record for receiving. But while the cheers could still be heard, George Sauer left pro football at the age of 27.
I've always thought it was a shame from the pro football sense that George retired when he did, because if he had stayed and had a full career, I think he'd be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame today.
After nearly 30 years, the case of Sauer's retirement is open again.
I did wake up one day and realized I couldn't play football anymore. And it was in January, the end of January, after we'd gotten back from the Super Bowl. For reasons that had taken me a long time to try to unravel, I lost all motivation. I didn't want to play the next season.
Sauer did play 2 more seasons, but finally, in 1971, he walked away. It seemed for reasons he expressed in an article written for the Newark Star-Ledger. He was one of a group of ex-players who became critics of pro football. But his reasons went deeper.
The first thing was that I was given a scholarship to the University of Texas when I was born. My father was played at University of Nebraska under D.X. Bible, and D.X. Bible was the athletic director at University of Texas when I was born. He sent a letter to my dad and said, we'll have a uniform waiting for him in 1961. I mean, he got the date right and the year right and everything. When I finally decided on the University of Texas, my mother brings out this letter that's 17 years old and shows it to me. It was as though something were driving me from behind to do these things, and actually, I think that was the first thing. The memory of that letter has stayed with me because I think that was important in my eventual retirement. I was trying to find my own way. I didn't always want to be my father's son. I wanted to be not George Jr., but I wanted to be myself.
To be himself, George turned to writing.
I think Norman Mailer said, sometime you discover truth at the end of your pen. So some ways writing is discovering something. It's a way of bringing something out of yourself that's truth about yourself, that might be truth about the world. So I did write a novel, and nobody liked it, and it was a little dense. I had to work on my style and work on some ideas, and finally I think I have them in shape, but it took me many, many years to do that, and I just needed to get away from football and find a new direction.
But the ultimate truth of George Sauer's retirement goes deeper still, all the way back to the locker room after Super Bowl III.
My dad was there, we shook hands. He said thanks, I said thanks. I don't know exactly what it was we're thanking each other for.
In this moment, George Sauer was set free.
I think all of us have a need to feel as competent as the person who is our example in life. Well, I think I had finally done that because my dad had played in an NFL championship game in 1936 with the Green Bay Packers, and they had won the game. That was 32 years prior to that, and 1936, 1968 seasons. And I realized I didn't have anything more to prove in football.
This is not to say that number 83 in any way regrets his playing days.
I really enjoyed pro football. I enjoyed catching passes, running patterns. I love the mental part of the game. I'm not really out of it because I'm writing about sports. I'm trying to make sense of sports. Maybe it was necessary for me to do that, to develop a couple of ideas that I have and finally get them out and throw that into the river and see where it goes.
In the hollowed skies of winter, a season comes full circle. Champions captured in metal, legends etched in gold and silver. Precious stones that tell the story of a team and the price that is paid for victory.
We had done something that no one else had ever done. We had gone from utter trash to gold.
He will hunt you down and tell you, make the frickin' play.
The only way to escape that kind of wrath was to be perfect.
I'm running out in the field, and Charlie says, you better take care of that ball. And Drew was kind of standing next to me, and he says, Dad, go out there and sling it.
And I got them together. I said, guys, we've worked our rear ends off to get here, but I emphatically made the point that this game's worth a big blanking ring.
They would start saying, kill, Bubba, kill. Kill, Bubba, kill. You were ready to snap this guy's neck if necessary.
And in that precise moment, when you know that the next ball game will be in the Super Bowl, it just doesn't get any better. It doesn't get any better than that.
And so the countdown begins to the greatest Super Bowl team of all time. One team more perfect than any other. 11 men, flawless, on either side of an imaginary line. Offensively, brilliant. Defensively, undaunted. Men work a lifetime for this moment. One game that can define a career. It's a game we all love. It's their game. It's our game.
This NFL Films production has been brought to you by NFL Network. Watch the National Football League 24 hours a day on NFL Network.